and welcome to the workshop Museums and Projects about the Great War at the Imperial War Museum. And what I'm going to do first of all is introduce the workshop and introduce my colleagues. I'm Helena Stride, Head of Learning at the Imperial War Museum's branches in London. Have any of you been to the Imperial War Museum before? What I thought would be useful is to give a bit of context to the museum, what we're about, what we do, what our remit is, and then say a little bit about why the centenary of the Great War, the First World War, is very important to us. And then the main body of the workshop will be my colleagues. We've got Anna Lettinger, Eleanor Hilton from IWM Museums London, and Vic Howarth from IWM North. And they will talk about some projects that have been initiated through this big centenary project, thinking about the significance of the First World War and how we get young people to engage with what is a long time ago and think about how we can make that relevant. So thinking back to some of the debates that have happened so far, the whole question of young people engaging with difficult histories, this is what we're about. We work as educationalists, we're all teachers, education officers. Our kind of training and background is very much working with young people, school-aged youth, and also engaging actually through families and occasionally with teachers. But very much from the educational perspective is the route that we're going to be addressing today. Now, there is IWM Museum London. We're going through a big transformation at the moment, and I'll tell you a bit more about that as we go through the slides. The Imperial War Museum was established to record and interpret the wartime contribution and experiences of men, women, and children of Britain and Commonwealth from 1914 to the present day. So thinking about the whole symposium and thinking about Europe, I've got to say we're kind of on the tip of Western Europe, and actually the remit of our museum is very much the British former empire, now Commonwealth contribution. So just to say a little bit about our name, because Imperial War Museum, sometimes people get confused about what we are. Some people think that we are a museum about how Britain developed and had a big empire through the 18th up to the 19th century and into the 20th century. The museum is not about the wars of empire. When the museum was set up, it was set up in 1917. It was decided that there should be some kind of museum to record and commemorate the First World War. This is 1917. This is before the war has finished, before there is, any conclusion, an idea that we could be actually on the victorious side. So, thinking about the way it was founded, it was decided that it should reflect the whole contribution of Britain's empire, the contributions of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the African colonies, India, colonies in the West Indies too. So the remit of the museum is very much linked to that kind of perspective. And my colleagues are going to talk a little bit about that as we talk about the workshops. I'm just thinking about the significance of how the museum was set up as a kind of people's museum. This shows a page from a ration book that was issued in November 1918. And already by that point, the government, the board that was set up to bring about the Imperial War Museum was trying to collect material about ordinary people's experiences of war. So whether servicemen and women, people who actually worked in factories, to collect a huge body of photographs, letters, any kind of material to do with the experiences of those people. What I'm going to just quickly show you some of the assets to do with our collections. Now, the Imperial Museum is not just exhibitions, it's a huge archive. We have 19,000 works of art. Our collection of paintings in Great Britain is second to that of the Tate Gallery for its importance as a modern 20th into the 21st century art collection. We have the National Repository and accredited with the Museum's Libraries and Archives scheme in regards to maintaining our collections. We have 36,000 hours of oral history, and we've got Harry Patch there, who was the last British Tommy serving man from the First World War who died a few years ago. So our oral history collection is very vast. We have a staggering 6 million photographs in our archive, mostly First and Second World War. There are some post-45 as well. And that is Frank Hurley's photograph of Passchendaele, a very famous photograph that gets used in many books and publications. We have a huge collection of posters, 30,000 posters. It's one of the most important modern poster collections, certainly in Britain and if not Europe. And this one is Alfred Leek's design for the Kitchener poster, probably the most famous or one of the most famous posters ever designed. We have 120 million feet of cine film, so our film collection is very important, and it's one of the first documentary film archives set up in the world. We have countless maps, diaries and letters, and we've got an example of a letter with a censor mark on it. We have a huge collection of artefacts ranging from small items like the Princess Mary gift box through to HMS Belfast, which is a Second World battle cruiser. So that is an object in our collection open to the public. Now the First World War is significant, very significant to us because we were born from the First World War. As I say, 1917, it was the spark that there should be some kind of museum. 1920, it was actually opened. Now, this is a quote from our Director General in regards to the message that the museum is trying to deliver in regards to why people should come to the museum and look at our First World War galleries. Now, later at the end of the session, I'll have a chance to debate what we've been talking about. But this, it's from our website. It says, our ambition is that a lot more people will understand that you can't understand the world today unless you understand the causes, course, and consequences of the First World War. Okay, so that might generate some discussion a bit later on, but that is the message that we have on our website from our Director General.
For the museum as such, yeah?
Yes, yes, on the museum's website.
There are 3 C's, right?
Sorry?
There are 3 C's.
Yes. Yeah, the 3 C's, yeah. Okay. Now, I'm just going to say a little bit. It has been mentioned before, some statistics from the YouGov audience research into the public's understanding of the First World War. And there is just some general statistics that are quite interesting. It was about 2,000 people were interviewed for this poll, so that's this data, 2,000. And 52% they said had fairly knowledgeable, in their estimate, in their idea about what the First World War was about. 61% of men tended to have a stronger interest in history, and knowledge increased with age in regards to the different sort of focus groups that were being looked at. And certainly out of the discussions, the impetus was that families are keen that children actually understand the impact of war on society, and children can act as history catalysts by work at school, coming to the museum as part of a family group to actually develop their understanding of the subject. This is a little diagram from the YouGov document that was published, and I think it links to one of the debates that was talked about in the day one actually, in regards to some statistics from the UK poll. And this again is about 2,000 adults, I say. Just some general questions about sort of knowledge or misunderstanding about the First World War in relation to the Second World War. 81% know that Germany was one of Britain's enemies during the First World War. 66% know that the First World War began in 1914. 47% know that the First World War was sparked by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. 44% know that Indian soldiers fought alongside British troops, which is quite an interesting statistic, and more about that as we move into the workshop. 34% know that Russia was one of Britain's allies during the First World War. 13% know that conscription started in 1916. And 7% know that women first got the vote in 1918. So that is the smallest percentage in regards to knowledge. Interesting snapshot. Now, certainly the museum was concerned about doing some front-end evaluation in regards to people's understanding and perspective of the First World War, because we are going through a big transformation, part of which will be opening a new First World War exhibition, which will open in July 1914. So we wanted to develop and create an exhibition that was fit for audiences of the 21st century. So we call it Transforming IW London. There's information about it on our website. This, if any of you have been to the museum, this is the old atrium. Some people call it sort of the biggest sort of toys, a boy's bedroom in regards to tanks, aircraft, big guns and things, actually on display in a big space there. That's going to be transformed. This is an artist's impression of that space. So basically, the ground floor has been removed, so it's completely open plan from the lower ground floor up to the glass roof. The terrace galleries have been extended, so there's more space for exhibitions as we go up the building. Oh, it's a bit murky. This shows you a display case in the old First World War exhibition. The First World War exhibition, the old version, was put together in the late 1980s. Lots of stuff in glass cases, lots of museum labels, few panels of interpretation, but when it was put together, there was understanding that there would be a greater knowledge in the general public in regards to the First World War. And even thinking about family histories, grandfathers, greater link with the past because it was so long ago in time. This is a diagram, artist diagram of the new display cases, the look of them. There'd be more interpretation and certainly more direct quotes of people from the time, the voice of the contemporary man, woman, child at that time. So the voice of contemporaneity will be a kind of thread throughout the exhibition. Some more dramatic displays. You can see our First World War tank, scale of people there. So it's a kind of sensation, perhaps, of the impact of men on battlefields actually seeing this kind of technology at that time on the battlefields. Okay. We've got some sort of key aims in regards to our exhibition, our learning programs, and the various events that are going to be happening for the next 4 years and beyond. We want to connect current and future generations with the lives, stories and impact of the First World War. Now for us, stories are going to be very keen, the personal stories, as I mentioned before, from collecting material back in 1918 in regards to people actually living at the tail end of the First World War. The idea that throughout our collections, personal stories, oral accounts, diaries, letters, photographs, all that kind of material to show perspectives of different people, different classes, men, women, civilians, conscientious objectors. There's kind of raft of different stories. We want to increase the understanding of the First World War and widen and gain new audiences and engage with young audiences. So engaging with young audiences is really our area of particular interest, and tell those stories. Now I'm just quickly going to say a few things and then we're going to get on to the practical kind of workshop. There is some big projects that we're involved in. One of the biggest is this one, Lives of the First World War. It's a massive data project in which we're working with other archives, organisations, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, National Archives. The idea is that over the next 4 years and beyond, we will create a digital database of at least 8 million servicemen from the UK, stories about women who worked in factories and were in the auxiliary services, using our data from our archives, medal records, as I say, the Commonwealth War Graves records where burials in regards to those that died on the battlefields. And the idea is a public sourcing activity where people can actually register, look for relations, and if they have got material, photographs, material that links with that particular story, there's a way of downloading that material to build up this massive database of stories of these individuals who participated or were influenced and affected by the First World War. Now, it's a massive project in regards to the construction of the structures to ensure that what is actually downloaded is corroborated. So there are certain structures and rules in regards to what people can actually download in regards to ensuring that what is put on this database isn't just sort of, speculation, that there is some corroboration that it is historical in its rigorousness. Okay. Our website's very important in regards to not only sort of attracting visitors to the museum, but as a very important source for researching our collections. We're in the process of digitising. We have vast collections, as I've mentioned, and the ambition is that as much as possible will be digitised. And you can search on our collections to look at photographs, and if you want to use those photographs, then you can license those photographs and use them in publications or in projects. We have, as I mentioned, the film archive and the oral history. All that material can be searched, or a lot of that material can be searched via our website. We have learning resources that are on the website, and information about, say, image and film licensing, loans, and blogs, and information about events that are happening. Last thing I'm going to say, and then we'll move on to my colleagues, is about the Centenary Partnership. Now, we knew that with the First World War centenary that it is big for the museum. As I say, we were born from the First World War. We owe our existence because of the First World War. We knew that the centenary of the First World War was going to be vastly significant. So we have developed this partnership. It's called the Centenary Partnership. There are over 2,000 organisations that are part of this, nationally and internationally. And basically it's a kind of central hub where people can get information, they can broadcast what they're doing, whether it's an exhibition, events. There's a huge calendar of programmes, all the events that are happening. It's going to be live for the whole of the centenary period from 2014 to 2018. It's a chance for people to pair up. For example, in Great Britain and the UK, we have lots of community projects, local museums are doing work, and the idea is that it's a central place where you can find out what is going on in regards to the First World War. There is an international perspective as well, so the idea is that also internationally organisations, museums, anybody who is doing something on the First World War can find out what is going on, and that's the idea. And if any of you are interested in sort of being part of that, all the information is on the website, but I can give you some of that information as well afterwards, so we have discussion a bit later on. Okay, and that's some of the material on the... for the partnerships to use. Basically, if you're a partner, you can have access to these assets for free. Because we realised that many people would want to use our archives, which is great, but they'll be asking for loans and wanting to license a lot of material. We felt that if we actually selected some material for those organisations, that it was an easy way for people to use our assets in a quite straightforward way. Okay, and that's just in regards to some of the activities. And here are some guides. There's a whole range of guides available on this extranet, on this particular website, where you can find out basically how to use photographs. If you're a little organisation that perhaps is putting on some event for the first time and you want to sort of bring in a greater number of people, or you've applied for some funding, there are advice booklets in regards to perhaps working with families, working with objects, film, working with schools, that kind of thing. So they're basically self-help books with advice from us in regards to the fact that we work with the subject all the time. If people want to have some tips and advice, that's what they are. And that's a little bit of introduction, and I'm going to move over to my colleagues Anna and Eleanor to actually talk about a specific project working with our collections aimed at engaging young people with the First World War.
So I'm Anna Lottinger, and this is Eleanor Hilton. We're going to be working together on this presentation. We're here to talk about our project, New Perspectives, Lesser Known Histories of the First World War. My students ask me why it's called a world war. This is one example of a type of question we were asked before we embarked on this project. Teachers were asked and they reported to us before we started on this project. So this project that we're doing is an example of one of the ways that Imperial War Museum's learning teams are trying to influence a change in how the First World War is taught and remembered in Britain. This is one of 3 learning projects that involve young people behind the scenes of Imperial War Museum, London. And that's during the first 2 years of its transformation process. It's a 2-year project, and in today's workshop, what we're going to do is kind of outline, give you a model of that project, and we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. So the project it challenges young people to take a new perspective on First World War through IWM's collections. So by new perspectives, we're thinking about 2 things. We're thinking about focusing on topics that are not so well known, and we're also thinking about letting young people bring their fresh ideas and responses to our collections and sharing that.
Okay, so as Anna said, we wanted this project to be very relevant to an impact on students' learning about the First World War in the UK. Obviously, there's a range of countries represented in this room, so we just want to say a little bit about how the First World War is usually kind of experienced by UK students. So, first of all, in school is one of the main ways that UK students will kind of come across this topic. It's typically taught in Year 9. Year 9 is age 13, 14 years old. It's different in different schools, depending on what the school's curriculum looks like, but typically between maybe 6 to 12 hours, taught over maybe 3 to 6 weeks. Okay, so not such a huge amount of time spent on it, but it is something that pretty much every student will experience at some point in school. Beyond the formal learning, they will also, every year, there's Remembrance Day, Remembrance Sunday. Most schools will probably mark this occasion as well, either through the 2-minute silence, that's usually observed in schools. Maybe associated with that, there'll be some kind of related assembly or school project. Okay. In terms of the focus of the topic, the focus tends to be on the causes of the war, how it was fought, so weaponry, conditions in the trenches, that kind of thing. Less on the consequences of the war, on the impact of the war. The focus also geographically tends to be on the Western Front, France, Belgium, less on the World War aspect. So this is changing. The curriculum is actually currently undergoing a significant change. The centenary is also quite a trigger for a lot of organisations to rethink their approach to the First World War. But this project is a way of involving young people in this process of change. And as Anna said, we wanted to kind of get involved and try and impact upon that process of change as well. So we had some initial ideas about what we wanted. Oh, sorry.
That's all right, doesn't matter. We had some initial ideas before we started the project about what this project could involve, what the outputs could be, and how this project could influence this process of change in how the First World War is taught in schools. But we wanted first to involve a broad spectrum of learning experts in the process to help us shape the project. So we outlined the project to learning professionals across the heritage, schools, universities, and teacher training sectors. There was an overwhelmingly positive response to a project that enabled students to research lesser-known aspects of the First World War and to produce a creative output. So from this research, what we found was that there were 4 key things that this project should address. One of them was archive skills. One of the things the teacher told us was, I don't know how to use an archive. I'm sure bet my students don't. What we've done, we've addressed this by creating a project that centres on recreating the archival research experience. And we do this for students so that students can explore the topic that we're looking at through IWM's collections. The second point was that it should have an interactive process for learning. So we wanted the project to be student-led. We've done this by making sure that the students' own interests are what lead the project forward. So we don't know where the project's going to go before it starts. Students select material that interests them, and the research follows. They're not told what's important. They learn and discover what they think is important for themselves. Third point. The third point was that because it's not already taught, it was important to have subject area support for teachers. There was definitely a sense people were saying to us, we need help in finding other relevant sources so that we can support this project. What we've done to address this in the project is we have worked with our school partners, sharing and consulting on what IWM collections actually go into our research packs, so they've been part of that process. We also produced abridged research packs for the teachers to learn more about the unfamiliar topics from our wider research. And we also, at the end of the project, we hand over the resource materials to the teachers so that they can use them post-project, so that they can continue to work with them and implement them in their work. And the fourth key thing that was important, felt to be important, was that there should be a creative output. It was agreed that this creative output, if it was going to be done, should be of a high quality, both with the ambition of getting that work produced by students into our Imperial War Museum permanent First World War galleries, and also so it's something that students could be really proud of that they produced. And we've done this by bringing in a creative partner, working closely with Chocolate Films, which is a local not-for-profit organisation who worked with the students to help them to produce the animated films based on their research.
So, based on this research and some initial research into IWM's collections, we came up with the following project structure. Okay, so the project, as Anna said, went over 2 years. There are 4 school projects, individual school projects, each of those school projects with a different school, with 30 students, all of whom 13 to 14 years old. The topics for the school projects, we had 2 projects that covered the war in Africa. We had 1 project that covered the Indian Army, and we had 1 topic that covered Turkey and Gallipoli. There were reasons for choosing these ages and these topics. The topics in particular were chosen for 2 reasons. As Helena mentioned, IWM's remit was recording and collecting material related to the conflict that involved Britain and the Empire and Commonwealth. Therefore, IWM's collections are very rich in these topic areas. But also, the teachers that we consulted with felt that these topics were particularly relevant to the demographics in their schools in multicultural London. And these are the schools that we were working with, and we wanted to make sure that these topics were particularly relevant to the students that we were working with. We also had 2 summer schools, which were a little bit different. They were each with 15 students, and they were 14 to 19 years old, so a little bit older. And again, the decision for that actually came from the topics that we chose to look at for the summer schools, which were physical impact of the First World War, so medicine, things like that, and the psychological impact of the First World War. Through our consultation, the teachers felt that these topics were slightly higher level and perhaps involved higher level of discussion and so on and so forth, and therefore that's hence the fact that the students for these topics were a little bit older. Okay, so we're going to, in this project today, we're going to focus on war in Africa. In this presentation, we're going to focus on war in Africa and the Indian Army, but if you do have questions about some of the other topics, just do ask us at the end. So, let's see, we're just going to have So having given a kind of overview of the project, I'm just going to go through what a typical New Perspectives project looked like, so you can get a real feel for what it involves. So first up, we would always do a topic overview with students. As Anna said, these are not topics that necessarily the students are going to be particularly interested in. Then would be the archival research and exploration phase. As Anna said, this was central to the project, that the students are actually having a go at using our archives and researching for themselves. So we're not telling them what to find, they're looking for themselves. So there's an element of exploration. They are then interpreting those collections material, so really getting a feel for what the museum actually does with this material, i.e. thinking about putting together exhibitions and things like that, and therefore curating an exhibition, which the students will do using the material. What they then do is start moving on to the creative element of this project. So they start developing and pitching, having chosen and narrowed down their choices, some ideas, and they're pitching those ideas to members of the First World War curation team at the museum. They're then carrying out contextual research. Okay, historical rigour is really, really important in this project. We're really trying to make the students understand the importance of this process, and therefore things that go into our gallery, we don't just make things up. And so the idea of kind of backing up what you're saying with evidence. They're then storyboarding their ideas, and then finally filming, as Anna said, animation films. Now, in today's session, what we're going to do is we're going to be doing some of these activities, so it's not just us talking at you. We're not going to do all of them, so we're not going to be making any films today. But we will be watching a couple of the students' films towards the end, so you can get an idea about what they produced through this process. Okay, so let's start off with the topic overview. So with the students, it's really, really important that we do this because we're expecting that they'll have done a little bit about the First World War in school, but as I said before, it's going to mostly have been very focused on the causes of the First World War. It's going to be focused on the Western Front, and therefore we're not really expecting them to know anything about this topic before we come. So we do a very brief overview of the topic. We use lots and lots of images, we're trying to make this very interactive, the students asking lots of questions. I'm not going to go through it all with you, but I will just show you a typical example. This map is one that I really like to use with the students. I think it's a really nice way in for them to really think about some of the issues that are going to come out in this project. It's a nice way of linking to the things that they do know, because I don't want to kind of basically start the project off by telling them that they don't know anything. So we start off by looking at it, maybe getting the students to tell us what they can see in the map. Who is involved is usually the first question I might ask here. Every country that's coloured a different colour obviously is a country that's involved, so the students are able to kind of link it with things that they already know. Some of those are going to be obvious to them already, but I think there's going to be some that are going to be quite surprising. So there's some debate there as well about just how many different countries are involved, and that's addressing what Anna was saying right at the beginning about actually the fact that a lot of students do ask, but why is it called a world war? Because traditionally the teaching has been so focused on Europe. From that, we might move on to thinking about the alliance system, because of the two different countries. We might address the key that we've got at the bottom down here. We might also think about what countries are not involved. Obviously, America here, because this is a map dating from December 1914, is not coloured at this point, but as the students are usually aware, they did join the war later on. So we can start by thinking about the familiar, okay? But we can also then start thinking about the fact that we've got maybe parts of the world that perhaps they might not have thought about before. So we can start zooming in, therefore, on the topic that we are going to be focusing in on. So, for example, with the India project, we'll zoom in on India. We'll give a bit of background. They will have done a bit about empire in school prior to learning about the First World War, so we'll try and link it in with that. Thinking about Britain's first involvement in India back in 1600, kind of talking about the development of colonial India, and then focusing in on the development of the Indian Army, how that came about, how it developed. And that way the students have a grounding of an understanding about why the Indian Army came to be involved in the First World War. For Africa, we'll do a similar thing. We'll talk about Cape Colony, obviously in the southern tip of Africa, Britain's first involvement down there, the development over time, particularly in the 19th century, the scramble for Africa, and different European countries' empire building within Africa. Because a lot of that is going to be unfamiliar necessarily. I think British students tend to know a lot about the British Empire. It can come as a bit of a surprise when they're learning about French Empire and so on and so forth. And so actually all the different European involvements in Africa. So, I can hand over.
Okay, so at this point, maybe just change this. Yeah. At this point, we're going to do the first of our doing activities, and we're going to get you to actually have a look at our archival research boxes. The point of this first activity with students is to get them to discuss in groups and kind of share with each other what they think is interesting from our collections. So they have a free exploration of the boxes and they have a good look through, and as a group together they have to come to a decision and choose just, okay, I'll leave them over there because I'm going to... Okay. So as a group they make a decision about something that they find interesting. They're going to share back at the end. So we're actually going to do this activity with you. We're going to get you, I think, to work in threes would be good, if you kind of work in groups of three. And then in your group of three, I'm going to ask for one member of your group, well, first as a group, to decide which topic you'd like to look at, because they're different archival research boxes. And you're going to use that in today's session. So it's either Indian Army or War in Africa are the two options today. And then to send one member of your group up to choose an archival research box, bring it back to the table, and as a group you can have an explore of our collection, see what we've produced, what we work with. But we are actually going to get you to share at the end. So what we normally get students to do is say what they think, what the other thing that they found is, what does it tell us, and why they think it's interesting. So we will share a couple at the end. But you're going to have about 10 minutes to do that. I think we're good for it.
10 minutes to explore.
Wow.
So,
yeah, there's a lot to look at, so you know we're assuming you can be faster than our students.
Yeah.
But these are index card boxes we had specifically produced for this project, so we want to share them. But we will look at them again later, so you know,
and
available at the end as well.
They're in the collection, so you can explore your art collection, documents, different parts of our collection. The only thing that we ask is maybe if you try and put the cards back in the correct section, but besides for that, just take them out. Mix them up.
Yeah. Okay.
So the boxes up here at the front, send a member to collect either Indian Army on this side or War in Africa on this side.
Germany, East Africa, and Germany, South West
What's the name?
Yeah, I think the borders are all, I was a little bit confused about where the modern borders lie, but yeah, I think in terms of covering, I should usually have a map that I give the students that actually covers, translates between like 1914 and the current day, but I didn't bring it. But yes, around there.
Lovely, thank you.
Sorry, no, I've been.
It's always popular. There's one that's most popular in Mars as well. Colonies were and their current boundaries were, but I didn't think of that shows things. So it is modern boundaries are not the same. So it's like Germany, East Africa is that's Tanzania. Yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, something that jumps out at you.
Right. Okay.
So you don't need to put it in anything, but something that you think is interesting. This is usually what we do with students. We give them a lot of time. We can't today afford to do that.
Choose one thing altogether which we find particularly interesting and we would maybe later like to use in the film. And we have to explain why we have chosen it and what is
I really think it's War Museum some years ago. Now we have a secondary you are preparing new exhibition with a new design, of course, modern. But what about the content of this exhibition? There are some new perspectives or some new ideas about the causes of the war.
What they wanted to do was, as much as possible, have it very much grounded in the time. So the kind of voices that you hear, quotes and things like that, are very much linked to that period, 1914 to 18. Yes, there'll be some overarching sort of mainline text, but wherever possible, that there won't be. It's very much the idea of voices of the time. So, basically, what is quite new about the exhibition compared to the older one is it starts in 1900, so it tries to show a picture of what Britain is like in peacetime before war starts, because the earlier exhibition, for example, starts with assassination or transfer right bang. So you have got context for people talk about Britain in the Edwardian period before the war. Thinking about the fact that we had an empire and trade and those sorts of things as well to give that kind of context. But it's very much trying to give a picture of what it was like at the time. Now, there is a degree of hindsight, obviously. There's not huge debates kind of written large in the mainline caption. The idea is to kind of pare down information so it's sort of quite succinct. That does give some context.
You said, my students asked me why World War. But I think the students could ask as well, why war at all? About the causes of the war.
Yes, there is.
I would say that that's something that's fairly well covered in the current curriculum. The causes isn't, we're trying to address a gap, I guess. So there's quite, in the current curriculum, there's quite a lot about the causes of the First World War, and they do spend a lot about it. So it's kind of redressing a balance. The World War aspect is one of the aspects that's not so well covered at the moment, and that's why we're focusing on that today.
And I think in regards to the exhibition, the museum very much wants to kind of reflect the collections that it has. It's a showcase for our collections. So yes, there is some information to do with the actual causes, but it's not going to be huge tomes of information sort of written in the exhibition, because actually our collections and the museum is a result of that. But there is some preamble rather than people straight in without any kind of information about why it happened.
Which will be open in July.
Yes, 19th to 20th, that weekend.
That's exactly all that's
I'm just going to say, probably give you about 2 more minutes to make a decision. If something you find doesn't have to be the most interesting thing in the box, but something you've encountered that you as a group think is very.
Yeah, we do.
What do you have? Decide on one thing to go. No. A dlaczego why this? Zresztą właśnie mówię po polsku. Może mówić po polsku i po białorusku. Nie, po białorusku, żebyśmy się zaczekali.
Nie, po polsku i po rosyjsku.
Ale to było...
Po białorusku.
No to co? Dlaczego to?
Słuchaj, ja to już tam jest o tych żołnierzach, którzy zginęł na tym statku. Dlaczego mówimy Jackie Cake, słynnym poetą.
This is become caught my attention.
Jedno zdjęcie?
Nie, jedno w ogóle.
To jest w każdej grupie.
Nie. Don't feel black. Ale jakbyś zobaczył, że mieliśmy mieć nowego ciekawego muzeum. Dlaczego to jest ciekawe? Znaczy, że nie.
Okay, I'm sorry to draw it to a close, but we've run out of time on this activity, but don't worry. It's just really to give you a chance to kind of explore a little bit, because this is something that's quite important in our project, that the students have a chance to kind of just really just have a look, and there's a lot of discussion that happens. It's quite free form, but actually we do find that the students really quite enjoy kind of having a look through and finding things that they find interesting, rather than us saying, look at this, it's really interesting. They just tell us what they think is interesting. So with that in mind, you don't have to share if you don't want to, but does anybody found anything that they thought was really, that kind of piqued their interest, that they want to share? Yeah, go on then. Okay.
We found two very interesting. So one is an African boy is beaten on the leg by a soldier of the King's African life.
Right.
That's very interesting because I think that for children it's very interesting to see other children. So if they see other children, what happens with them during the war, that's a very good case for the to teach them something about the war. They have immediately much more interest in the topic.
Yeah.
But a second case is much more interesting because I suppose it's for children it could be quite a misunderstanding. It's Maasai's passing guys drinking blood before going on a trek in Bissau, British East Africa. And I suppose the children cannot understand it really. Why they are drinking? It's quite normal to drink blood, and they really, and if you do it like that, so the children they think, well, they are the savages in Africa. They are drinking blood, and you really cannot see an animal here, but only people. So that's still, well, they are drinking blood, and they are only people. So that's of course very confusing for them.
Absolutely.
And I think that such a case needs much more explanation for children.
Absolutely. Can I just search drinking, and it'll come up. Sorry, I'm just trying to bring it up so that people can see what you're talking about, particularly that second one.
But the number is 457.
I think it's in the other one. It's in the other one, the one that was up before. No, it's in the other one. Yeah.
Drinking,
Yeah, and then click the right click of the arrow. Yeah. Okay, so this one here, so it is a really interesting one, this one, because we're seeing quite a lot of the African culture in this particular photograph, and I really like what you said, Dominic, because I think really that's what comes out, is that the students, the things that tend to pique their curiosity are the ones where they immediately want to ask you a question. They're like, why, what is this, and who's standing there, and what are they going to go and do, and there's all sorts of questions that come out of it. So it's that natural process of exploration that comes through. So that one's a really interesting one. Is it beating, I think, if you search the word beating? And that one will bring up the other one. That must be the other one.
Beaten.
Beaten, oh sorry, beaten. I don't think that's going to come up, but okay. But that one was the particular one. So shall we move on to somebody else who's got something else they want to share?
I have a compilation of interviews with Kenyan veterans on the campaign in East Africa, 1418, and the two reels making up part of a compilation of interviews with various Kenyan veterans of the First World War. Interviews compiled were given in Kikamba and Kiswahili languages. Translation is still required, that's what it says. I mean, it shows the very multicultural perspective of this war, and it shows that the memories are held in language which is probably completely foreign for the students involved, and that the translation probably not yet exists is even an advantage for this object or for this presentation, because it's 2-3 minutes and its recording date is 1991. So I think it's a good pretext, so to speak, to show the varieties of the nations which were engaged in this war, and show that they have their own memories. And then once we see how their memories are structured and what they're talking about, we probably see the different cultures of memory
that all different African cultures, and I think it's a very interesting perspective for the students.
It is, and I'm really glad you chose that one, because actually there's been a development since we made these card boxes. We actually had them translated, so it's been quite an ongoing process, because the man who did the interviews is actually Gerald Rilling, who we kind of tracked down. He's the guy who donated them to the museum back in in the 1980s, and he's been kind of working on a project since to get them translated, and so we worked with him to get those translations and kind of help move that project along so that it could kind of marry in with ours. So we actually do now have the translations doubly translated, I should say interpreted, shouldn't I? And it is very, very interesting, because the cultural kind of storytelling aspects, the different ways that stories are kind of passed down, you can really hear it in the interviews. What he did was he went around different villages in Africa and spoke to obviously quite old veterans by this time, and asked them to tell their stories. But it's very interesting to listen to them as a whole and how they kind of intertwine with one another. And there's a particular myth that they all talk about as well, about this woman right at the end of the war who was found in a tree sniping at people and wouldn't surrender, and they all reference this probably a myth of the First World War, but it's become part of their kind of cultural storytelling almost in that area. It's fascinating. And I mean, Gerald Rilling told us that one of the reasons he felt he needed to do these interviews is because the African voice is so little heard when we're talking about the First World War. So we were really, really pleased to be able to include that, to try and add a little bit of balance to our collections, and trying to kind of bring out that story a bit stronger. So I'm really glad you chose that one.
Thank you.
Has anybody who's looking at an Indian Army got anything that they wanted to share, or anything else that they looked at that they thought was interesting? Or should we move on? Should we move on then at that point? I think you've just got a flavour, haven't you, about the kind of collections that we've got, the kind of discussions that we would have with the students, because we would have these kind of conversations to try and answer some of those questions, but also start thinking about, from a museological perspective, the fact that there are gaps in our archive. So we're actually beginning to think about what an archive is, what it involves, what's missing, who puts those archives together, some of the practical elements of putting an archive together. How, there was nobody who spoke Kiswahili or Kikamba in the museum, and that's why it wasn't translated for so long. And getting that done, that project, was quite a big process for the museum. Which 100 years on, and we've finally got this amazing story as part of our collection. So I just wanted to say a little bit about what the students have there, because obviously they're learning a lot about the topic, either War in Africa or Indian Army, depending on what they've been looking at. But it's more than that. It's about the skills, which I've kind of hinted at, but let's have a little talk about that. So obviously their archive, an introduction to searching in an archive and researching skills. Some basic source analysis for a lot of these students. They are quite young, 13, 14 years old, but thinking about, because at the bottom of the cards you'll have noticed we try and put the contextual information to help them start asking questions. A lot of the photographs, for example, in our collection are official photographs. So we always try and label that so that the students can start thinking about who's taken this photograph, why have they taken this photograph, so they can begin to start critically analysing these sources for themselves. And also, because this is a group project, a group discussion, they're starting to communicate, justify their choices. So thinking about what is important to us as historians. So obviously this is familiar to us, but for the students, this is the introduction to skills they may not have been using in their studies at school.
So once they've explored our material, we start to introduce the students to the idea of interpretation, how we use our museum collections to interpret and to tell different stories. So what we do is a linking activity. We're not going to actually do this one. At this point, we do this to help the students develop some skills that they're going to use in the next activity that we will do. So we use a real object to do this, bring up the object. What we would do is we would pass it round so that everybody gets to feel the weight, have a look. We didn't think it was a good idea to bring it on the aeroplane to Prague, so we don't have the object with us today. But
you do it with the chosen, with the objects which the students have chosen?
No, we
before,
do this.
Okay.
We do this with this object, and it's a different activity. So this is after we introduce this object and we pass it round. And actually the students can be quite surprised at how much they can find out about an object just by closely examining it. But then at the end of them examining it and having a hold of the object, we tell them just some basic things about it. So we say it's a 13-pounder British shrapnel shell from a 13-pounder artillery gun from the First World War. But then we move on to introducing them to the idea of thinking about this object in context. We put up this image, and we get the students to have a close look and tell us what they see, and start to think about the shell in the context of this image. So they start to think about it in terms of on the fighting front, with large artillery guns, actually as the weapon. Also they start thinking about things like how many men it takes. So they've already felt the weight of the shell. They have a real sense of how heavy that is. And then this large gun, so actually recognizing like weight and size of this weaponry. And how many men, the kind of teamwork that goes into actually maneuvering this. And not just that, they'll often notice, somebody will start to notice this ammunition dump at the end there, and thinking about actually supplying this, and the people involved in that process of the fighting front. So you're looking at the shell in this context of large gun on the fighting front, landscape, and we can have quite a few discussions on this. We then show it in the context of this image, and they start to think about it actually in the context of factories, manufacture of this shell. So they'll see a factory, people working different size shells, but they also start to notice, once they look at this photograph a little bit more, start to think about who's in it. Beyond the front row, actually, most of the people working in the factory are women, and we start talking about this kind of demographics of workforce. So we see the shell taking a very different meaning next to this image. Then we show next to something like this, so the Disabled Soldier's Handbook from 1918. It was given to men disabled during the First World War. So when we bring this up, we get them to think about how this links to our shell. One of the things we do tell them is that shells, large artillery guns were responsible for 60% of all death and injuries in the First World War. So they start to think about the legacy, the impact, long-lasting impact on disability, also things like pensions. And we have some discussions about that. So once we've had a look at these different things, and sometimes in the project we will select material from the packs that we're using and start to use those, because you can actually relate a lot of material to the shell. But we're not going to do this today. When we look back at the shell, we think as a group about if we were going to put this into an exhibition, how you decide where it's going to go. How do you decide what story the shell is going to tell and at what point. So we start to learn that museums' collections are a tool for telling different stories. And that's the beginning of that process, which we're going to go on to do more.
So really what Anna's just been talking about there is kind of like the basic introduction to how we start thinking about putting an exhibition together. Because we look at all our material in our collections and we think about all the different linking stories. And as Anna said, we have to make decisions about where this material is going to go. And so because of this, we can then lead into our next activity, which is where we start getting the students to think about actually putting material from our index card boxes and making an exhibition of their own about the topic that they've been looking at. Okay, so this is the second doing activity that we're going to be doing. We're going to be getting you to have a little go at that as well. So what we do is we get the students to have a think about applying what they've learned, curating this exhibition. We set it up by telling them about the process that's happened at our museum. So we talk about the First World War exhibition team, who we've worked quite closely with in putting the exhibition together over a process of 2 years. We asked them, the members of this exhibition team, what they found difficult. The first thing they say is writing the text. It's very, very difficult to write a very big story in a very limited way, whilst keeping historical rigour, balance, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the number one really hard thing to do. We then reassure the students that it's okay, they don't have to do that. We have actually had a go at writing the text ourselves. The bit that the students are going to do is the second thing that the First World War team said is really difficult. It relates to the activity we've just done. It's making decisions and choices about what material they're going to use in this exhibition to interpret the text. Okay. Now this is quite high-level thinking for this age group. So if we're the students of this age, what we would do is we would actually practice this together. We would give them a sentence maybe from an exhibition panel and ask them to think about the meaning of that sentence, and then each group, we would work on the same sentence and they would choose something from the box that they think links nicely to that sentence. We're not going to do that today, we're going to skip on to the main activity, but I just felt it was important that we don't just leap in with the students, we do have steps that lead towards this. But what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at a panel of exhibition text that links to our topic and have a go at choosing something. Okay, so what we've done, we've got, which I'll bring out in a second, we've got some panels for Indian Army, we've got some panels for War in Africa, so obviously make sure you choose something that links to the box you've got, otherwise you're going to find it really hard. Choose one panel as all, so just have a flick through something that takes your interest, it's up to you really, and then maybe just have a flick through and make some decisions about what you think might go. In some cases something might jump out at you and you think, I think this is really the thing that I want to show. In some cases it might be quite a hard decision. We do try and help the students to think about the nuances, as not just taking the first thing that comes their way, but really thinking about, well, the different things that we have to think about as a museum. So obviously we want to have a balance of different things. We would get the students to think about making sure that different parts of our collection are represented, so we don't just have all photographs or all objects. We also get them to think about some of the practicalities of it. You can't have the same object in two places at the same time, so there's a little bit of negotiation that goes on in this activity. That probably won't happen because we're quite a small group. We also get them to think about things like you know, just actually wow factor objects. We are a museum and we want people to come and visit our museum. So obviously we want to choose things that make people want to cross a room to go and have a look at it, and it's just an interesting thing to look at. So all of those different factors are things that you need to kind of think about, and obviously something that's going to link nicely to the text that you've been looking at. So, yeah, basically, I'm going to lay out the exhibitions on the side as before, so just come up and choose something that interests you. We're going to spend about maybe 10 minutes or so on this one. There should be enough time to do one. If you really want to, you could probably do two in that time, but it's up to you. So, I'll put, this is Africa over here, and I'll put Indian Army here. Okay. Just one panel, yeah. You might want to do more, but it's up to you.
One exhibition panel from exhibition, and what you do is using War in Africa, index up, have a look at material that links that you would choose to help to interpret this panel. So as a group, decide which one thing.
But we take only one panel.
One panel
together and choose an object which we
if you have time, you can do another bit. Okay. It's more about discussion and choosing which one.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be in any way connected to the object we have chosen.
Yes. No, that was about just interest. Now it's about choosing stuff specifically for exhibition.
We are to take one of the panels connected to Africa and decide which one we use, and then select the best objects to kind of correspond to the text.
Okay, I'll be right back. It's just about outbreak.
Yeah, we actually pre-selected it before, and then we found this paper that would fit.
Oh, so you found something. That's a clever way to work. In which case, maybe you should do another piece.
Yeah, good students get rewarded with more work.
And do you know this oral history accounts which we have chosen? It is connected to the carriers, or they were
Actually, very strongly. I would love to have brought all our materials, but carrying it on a plane is quite hard. But yeah, the interviews are really rich in that most of the African experience is this, basically, especially from a British perspective. Arming Africans was, not something that happened. There was the King's African Rifles, but in most cases, Africans were recruited for manual labour, and carriers in particular. So nearly all of the oral history interviews are interviews with people who were carriers, and they're talking about their experiences, about the difficult life in terms of recruitment. It's very interesting. A lot of them talk about the fact that they're recruited through their chief. So the British basically imposed kind of what's the word I'm looking for? There was a target number of people that they had to volunteer, but they were not volunteered. Yeah, so a lot of the people would say in their interviews, I don't really know how I ended up doing it, but like my chief volunteered me and I had to go. So it's not really, so the British always refer to them as volunteers, but really when you dig down and you listen to the oral histories, it's not, it's coercion, it's kind of, there's an element of force involved.
it's about the interviews that
What we actually do, so there's a lot
that they
more in
were
the process that we
that because on the carriers, yet that they were not fighting as soldiers, but were as supportive staff, so to say. And Eleanor said that those interviews you have chosen, that they are mostly with people who were serving as carriers.
Okay.
So we could, I don't know, we could take this as one of the, yeah, and then we can try some.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have a look at another one if you want, you've still got time.
But then maybe we can still search for something. Możemy poszukać jeszcze czegoś innego, jakichś jeszcze innych materiałów, nie wiem, na fotografię na przykład, a ja poszukam, by ci to było coś nazywało.
I think you get the idea. Basically, the aim of this activity is that we're getting the students to discuss and to hopefully choose a piece of material. But really it's about unpicking and going behind the scenes of the museum and thinking about what an exhibition is and what it involves. Basically, a lot of students might come to the museum and go to the exhibition and just think that this is the truth, whatever that means. And really what we're trying to get them to think about is the fact that exhibitions are put together by human beings and therefore choice is involved, interpretation is involved. They can see by doing this process that you can choose all sorts of different pieces and make a legitimate choice. And that would make a very different exhibition depending on what choices they make. And we want them to think about that so that then when they go out to the museum and so on and so forth, they can see and they can apply that to our exhibition that also involves human beings making choices from a vast amount of material. So I just wondered if some people could share maybe one or two of the choices, and actually we could compare to what our last school chose. So if anybody would like to share what they came up with, maybe if you say what the title of your panel is as well, that would help.
Yeah, we chose African soldiers.
African soldiers.
Yeah, because there is a line here that the British refused to ensslave African men for frontline fighting, and we found these private papers of Lieutenant Frederick Johnson, which is a diary and a memoir, where he puts that he was particularly outraged at being put under the charge of black African guards. So we can then discuss these racial issues during the war.
Yeah.
Which is,
Yeah.
which is one thing that could be interesting for children.
Yeah, and it is. It's really great when that kind of they pose the question to us and start talking about, what that means to them from a 21st century perspective. In fact, the person who wrote that is actually a missionary who happened to be in Africa and was then taken prisoner, I think. It's a while since I looked at it. And so that adds another dimension as well, the idea of religion, and then, but also this kind of very racist attitude coming through as well. He's outraged that the German Ascari guards, that this is the thing, more than being imprisoned, is the thing that upsets him the most, is the fact that his guards are black. So it really helps us to think about some of these issues with the students. The last school that we looked at, that we worked with, chose something different. They chose this one here. This is the 3rd Battalion Nigeria Regiment sounding a kind of bugle farewell, which was the when officers were transferring. They thought that was particularly interesting. I think they really liked the idea of the trumpets as well with that one. But very different direction from what we've looked at here, but no less legitimate. And obviously there could have been many other choices as well. Did anybody else want to share something that they chose that we want to discuss? Yeah.
Present up.
So just go on.
We have chosen this about.
These carriers, the majority of black Africans who were recruited by the British did not serve as fighting soldiers but as carriers. Military campaigns in tropical Africa relied on people to carry supplies because vehicles were limited and unreliable and animals were prone to disease. The carriers often worked in form of human chain, that was it said, and we have 3 objects.
So we thought it would fit good to the interviews. As you said, they are connected to the stories of the carriers, so it would give even better if they are translated, would give an idea of their experience. And then we have found a document which is a report, I understand a British report on the work of the carriers and the way they were recruited, so that would give different perspectives, the African one and the British one. And then because we thought now it's only text and what you can listen to, but there are no visual materials, and there is one of these photographs of the carriers, which is this African carriers and wounded men on an improvised stretcher across a river.
When they're being carried across
which shows the hard work also they have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. A really nice collection there, and looking at different aspects. It's interesting that the students actually chose the interviews as well for the same reasons. A lot of the interviews, and I did explain this to this group, but maybe for the benefit of the rest of the group, a lot of those interviews are with carriers. 1 million. It's the majority of the African experience is working as labour or carriers. And the students were really drawn in by these interviews. We gave them transcripts which they could have a look at, and they chose some quotations. And this one they were really interested in what the porters ate, and the food. The food was actually quite an issue. There was the amount that they had to carry, and they often didn't have enough to eat of the right food. So disease was quite rife within the carriers. It was a very difficult life, and the students were very, drawn in by this. So it's interesting they chose the same thing as you, which doesn't happen so often. But yeah. Okay, but I hope that gives you an idea, really, about what the students learned from this, because, again, it isn't just about the topic. Obviously, they get to look at one topic in a bit more detail, but they also look at skills as well. So they are researching and trying to make a good decision, group discussion, and so on and so forth. Making their decisions together, and really, as I said, thinking about what it is to put an exhibition together, with the skills that are involved, the discussion, the decisions, and really getting a better flavour about what we do at the museum. Was it me again? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Oh, yes, there we go. Yeah. Just check through. Yeah. Okay, so at this point, we move on to the creative aspect of the project. Okay, they've done a lot of research. That research underpins everything that we're doing with the students, and we're trying to introduce them to, skills as historians that we are very familiar with, but might be quite new for the students. But as Anna said, one of the important parts of this project from the consultation that we did was a creative output. Where is this research leading us to? So the students then have to start thinking about choosing the pieces that really have spoken to them, the things that they're particularly interested in. In their groups, we get them to choose 2 particular pieces from the collection, from the index cards box, that they would like to make a film about. Stories that they really feel they would like to share with RWM's visitors. These are films that, if chosen, could go into the First World War exhibition. So this is something the students take very seriously, the idea that actually IWM visitors will get to see their work. So they're very serious about this part. The students then pitch these ideas to a curator from the First World War exhibition team, who helps them to learn a bit more about the history behind their topic, and also to help them choose which idea to take forward. Okay. This process of pitching and discussing their ideas with the curator, it really helps the students to connect what they're doing with the museum, and it makes them really feel part of it. It's not just work for work's sake. This is something that is real. It makes them feel like it's real history. This is something that is being taken seriously by the museum, which I think is really important for the students to feel.
May I ask one thing?
Yes.
If you say that they are given the context to the particular objects, is it more a sort of lecture in that sense that the curator would give them the context, or again they have to make their own research on the given materials, selected material?
We give them quite a lot of time to prepare for their pitch, and in that time we are helping them. We kind of give them leads, but help them to research. They've got quite they have to be able to explain, because we say to them, obviously our collections are so huge, our First World War curators, even though they've been working on an exhibition, are not familiar with absolutely everything in the collection, and therefore there's a good chance that whatever they choose, that the curator won't know about it. So part of the pitch is that they need to explain to the curator what this is, why it's important, what it involves, why should IWM visitors learn about this. They have to explain and persuade the significance of this piece. So that's part of it. There is a point when they can ask questions, and then the curator can give them extra information or leads if there's anything that they've missed out. So it comes from the student. That underpins the whole project, that it's student-led, and their learning and their understanding. The response from the curator is kind of helping to just kind of guide a little if needs be. So this point is very, very important. But as they leave their pitch, they have then chosen one idea that they're going to take forward. So at this point, we then go back into research again, and this time it's contextual research, because they're now thinking about this in a visual way, and they're having to think about how are we telling the story in a balanced way, in an historically rigorous way, and they need to basically write a list of their own questions that they need to research. Things like, what clothes are people wearing? What food are they eating? Whatever story it is that they're going to be taking forward, they come up with their own list of inquiry questions that they then go and research. So we're not telling them, we're getting them to write and then research their own questions in this very important phase. Once they fully research their ideas, they then start working with a representative from Chocolate Films. There's a couple of pictures of them researching. There we go. I forgot about that bit. They start working with a member of Chocolate Films, the partner that Anna was talking about, who Anna and I don't know very much about animation, so they are experts in that field, and they start putting together their storyboard, really thinking about what they want what story they want to tell. These are very short films; they're 1 minute to 2 minutes long, and they're animations. So that has a big impact on how they tell their story. So it's very important that they work with Chocolate Films to help them do this. They then work very intensively over just 2 days to make their animation. And every single animation has been completely different. They're led by the story, and therefore the look of them, the feel of them are all very different. We can see some photographs here of the students working with the various Chocolate Film animators. They're using different materials. We've got cutouts, we've got sand and kind of visuals like that. This one here was a really interesting one where they're working using themselves as silhouettes. and backlighting behind them to kind of animate themselves. I learned so much from this process of creatively what can be achieved in 2 days, and these are beautiful films. So we do want to, I don't know if we've got
show them in the break instead?
Yeah, great to see.
What we thought we'd do, because I'm aware of time.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to show one now, but I think maybe if we get to the end of the presentation, do you want to show one?
Should we show one
Okay.
now, so that you can get an idea?
And then during the break, we have them on loop, and actually it'll be a preview. These haven't been seen by the public yet. We'll leave them on during the break, so if you want to have coffee and watch more of them, you can.
Yeah. Just to give you an idea, really, this is just one from our first project, actually. The students were looking at medicine, was the theme that they focused in on, and it was the diaries of a nurse who had been posted to Africa, and the students were really drawn in by some of the elements of the story.
And it's not entirely on the screen, but that's...
Can everyone read that? Is it helpful to read it out, maybe? So that gives you just a flavour of one. They're all very different, and so we'll put them on loop so you can see some of the variety. And
They're incredibly sophisticated. I'm absolutely.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
The students, I think they felt so involved. They really felt strongly that this is a story they wanted to tell, and they wanted to tell it visually, and they wanted to draw. They really thought about their audience. This nurse, and the kind of in her diary, she talks about the people who come and go, and the sadness that she feels when she didn't know who this person's name was, even the sailor who died, and then she felt that it was very sad that the mother couldn't be there at the funeral, and so she and the nurses went to try and be with the family, and this very personal story. Really, the students found very involving, and they were very, really wanted to tell that story. That goes for all of them, so we'll put them on loop so you can see.
But in terms of telling the story and the film technique, it's amazing. I mean, they're future Hollywood stars, I'm sure.
Yeah. We were really impressed with
pass that on to them.
We'll pass that on. International feedback.
These are then shown in the main exhibition, or
we'll just talk about that.
Legacy. So in our initial research, that everyone we spoke to in that initial research that we said that we did, everyone said what we needed this project to have was some sort of tangible legacy beyond the last day of the project. And actually, the last of our school projects was this Tuesday. We were filming this Tuesday gone, and one of the films being made was about the interview with the Kenyan veterans, but that's one we can't show yet because it hasn't been edited. So legacy of these projects is really, really important to us, and these are just some of the ways that people can engage with the project post-project. So we're going to, screening events. Each project, each school project, has a screening event in the school with parents, family. We invite the funders from the project, we invite the curators who've worked with us to actually go to the school, and the students present their own films in that context. And the school organises that. We also have put 2 screenings into Imperial War Museum's Short Film Festival. It's going to be in October 2014. and they will be open to the public as well as inviting all the participants and being a real whole celebration of all of these projects. The person who's curating that exhibition, who's curating the film festival, has also said that these are such high quality, he'd like to use them as kind of shorts before all of the other screenings to kind of show what we're doing. So they're going to reach a wide audience through that. We also have lots and lots of blog posts on our Transforming IWM London blog post about what's been going on behind the scenes. We have ones written by our school partners, by some of the students and by ourselves. So they're worth checking out also to hear other people's voices on the projects particularly. We have had agreement that they are going to go into the new First World War galleries. That was always an ambition for these projects, but obviously we didn't know how many. They're very keen to put them on into the galleries. When you watch the films, what you'll notice is that the films, they all link to objects that actually be in the gallery. Some of those links are very clear in there. It's because the students, when they do the pitching, they have to think thematically, linking to one particular theme that then links to an object. So there are 10 objects in the new First World War gallery that will have a digital label, where you can kind of explore more perspectives, and the students' work will sit on those next to something that has a thematic link. There's going to be a new Perspectives webpage going live by the time the new gallery is open, where all the films can also be viewed. There are also going to be new Perspectives school sessions in our formal programme. So what we've done is a kind of condensed version of kind of what you've done today. There'll be a 1.5-hour session that will be that schools can book to come to, and we're going to do that with the topics War in Africa, Indian Army, and Turkey and Gallipoli. So those 3 topics in the first instance, possibly can extend that in the future, where they will do the archival research part of the activity, and they will produce an exhibition that they can bring back to their schools. Hopefully some of them might be inspired to then use those collections and produce films themselves, but that won't be part of this session. So there's quite a few ways that we'll have legacy of these projects. And finally, I want to talk about the impact. We haven't actually done, as we said, Tuesday was the last day of the school project, we haven't actually done our full evaluation report yet, but when we do, that'll be available for people to read. But we have been collecting along the way, and we just wanted to share a little bit about the positive impact that this project has had on our school partners across the museum and for young people involved. So as an example of the impact on schools, our project partner Dan Linden, history teacher at Broomfield School, said, "I mean, I've been in this game for quite a long time now, nearly 20 years or so, and I think this is definitely the best enrichment project I have ever done. The whole thing came together in a perfect storm of really good stuff." At Dan's school, the topic that they did has now been integrated into the curriculum. He's made sure that that is now in school curriculum, and he's using the end of project materials that we provided. He ran some mini versions of the project, actually making films with other students as a way to kind of recruit students, and said that it was definitely had an impact on the popularity of students taking GCSE exam level history. He showcased the project as well to government education inspectors, Ofsted. In Britain, schools are inspected, and he said that he felt that his school felt this played a key part in increasing the school's official rating. So very positive impact in that particular school, and we think in others too. We haven't got all the data in yet.
Who's doing the ratings in Britain? The rating, the school ratings?
Ofsted.
Ofsted, it's
It's a government body that inspects all schools. Every school has to do it. It's quite a nerve-wracking.
And they sort of present it as a particular achievement.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, and schools get like different levels, and that counts for popularity of the school. In Imperial War Museum, it's been a two-way process of curators and young people sharing ideas, and our curators feel it's been a very positive thing for them to work on, to see the kinds of questions that have been asked about collections, how young people engage with our collections, and certainly it's been very positive for us to develop new ways of working, which we're going to continue to use in the future. And finally, for young people, Rachel's quote from the summer school is one that we liked. Not sure how to begin to list all the skills I gained, improved in this programme. Research and analysis are only the tip of the iceberg. Thanks. So that was nice, nice bit of feedback. If we go, there's a quote. Oh. I didn't just want to use that one quote. So what we do is we get our students at different points for evaluation. We get them to write on post-it notes some of their responses any day. They can write a highlight, they can write something they enjoyed, something they learned. I want to share a bunch of those with you. So seeing our idea for the films begin to come to life and discussing how creative everyone in the group is. Discussion with the curators and beginning to picture the animation. Learning more about the exhibition taking place and how it's different from the others. I enjoyed making lots of choices and deciding how we are going to create our film. I learned that India was a big part of the First World War. I've enjoyed experimenting with the different types of animation. I enjoyed discussing with people on my table. So a good range of feedback of all the different aspects of types of skills that they've gained throughout the project. Going back to this, my students asked me why it's called a world war. We hope that these projects and the dissemination of these projects will influence how the First World War is taught and remembered in Britain. And that's our goals in these projects. Before you stop, we're going to have a break in a moment. But in the same way we do with students, we're going to give you each a post-it note, both because we'd love to hear any comments you have fresh from experiencing this, but also because we're going to leave questions till the end after Vic has spoken. You might want to also use that to write some questions you have, because we can address those later. So I'm going to give everyone one of these, and then we're going to have a short coffee break. 15
minute coffee break. So I don't know what time it is now because that clock doesn't work. But
yes.
What time is it now?
It's 5
to 11.
5 to 11. So quarter 10 past.
Yeah.
If that's
Is that okay? And we can bring the coffee back anyway, but we just start late.
And we're going to put the films on loop, so if you want to bring your coffee back and watch some of those while you talk and stuff, or do your post-it note at any point during that break.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.